You're listening to another ambitious entrepreneur.network.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
This is Women in Leadership Podcast, featuring success insights from women around the globe. Now, over to your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of Women in Leadership Podcast, brought to you by the Influence Alliance, the business building community for coaches and consultants who want to build a profitable and scalable business. Now, today's topic is one that I'm so glad we're covering, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Donna James. Now, she says, yes, the thought of leaving your abuser is terrifying, but so is the thought of staying. But only one of those options can result in your happiness and freedom. Now, Donna is a domestic abuse survivor turned certified coach, a consultant and speaker. And after fleeing her abusive marriage with her younger sons, no money, no confidence, and no clue on how she would survive, she was determined to build a safe, a healthy, and a happy life for her and her boys. Now, Donna has worked extremely hard to completely rebuild her confidence, her courage, and her life. And her transformation has led her now to coaching other women who've been silenced by an unhealthy or abusive relationship. Now, since 2006, she has been successfully helping women to heal, empowering them to shift their mindset, unblock their limiting beliefs, and rebuild their confidence to find their voice again, move forward, and live and love on their terms. Now, on today's show, Donna is going to share domestic abuse. Well, that can happen to anyone, and the experience that many of us are experiencing around the globe has forced people to be at home, so causing the home maybe not to be a safe place. She's going to talk about most forms of abuse. They're not or they're non-violent, so victims don't recognize or they cannot really consider the toxic behavior that may be impacting them, as well as the importance of letting go of guilt. So welcome to the show, Donna.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. And, before we went live, I was talking about sometimes guests who have different topics. And today I've been back streaming my guests. And the last show, we talked about how so many people are working from home now, and so many people are having to be locked down. And what this has done is it has brought to even more extreme situations where now women are feeling unsafe. Children are feeling unsafe. So it's so good that you are here sharing your story. And I know that through the insights that you've shared, the steps that you've taken, I'm hoping that if someone is watching or listening today, or if someone knows of someone who is experiencing this, that they'll have some practical steps to be able to move forward. And I know at the end of the show, you're going to be sharing some resources that people can get access to so that they know that they're not alone. You are someone who has been there, and now we'll say at the onset, you've got a beautiful, loving husband who supports you. So that is amazing. So let's talk about, you say domestic abuse can happen to anyone. Share a little bit more about that, Donna.
Well, a lot of people think that to be in an abusive situation, it usually happens to people that either grew up in an abusive environment, or they're lower income, less educated, and there's kind of this stigmatism is that it's people that are not aware that it happens to. And when in fact, I didn't have any domestic violence in my family at all. I was educated, went to college, and it happened to me. And when I started seeing all these people I was dealing with doctors, lawyers, policemen, all these different professions and different socioeconomic levels that people were coming from, that were experiencing that, this wasn't an issue just with lower income people or people that, had a lower level of education or, came from an abusive environment, that can happen, but it also happens to anyone. Anyone is at risk.
With the situation, as I mentioned, with so many more people now having to be at home and in environments, I mean, the complexities and the uncertainty and the stress and anxiety often that is caused by, in some instances, the workplaces, and we can bring that at home. So there may be now situations where previously, and there may be the cracks that have been there, certain things that are happening, but now all of a sudden you've got this environment which is causing, other instances and things that we're having to navigate through as well. So you say also too that most forms of abuse are actually non-violent. For some people it may be. Really? So share a little bit more about what are some of the things that you've learned, that maybe you've experienced, that until someone actually showed you this is actually not right and is considered a form of abuse. What were those things? Can you enlighten us with some of the things you've learned?
Of course, for my situation, it started off as being verbal, emotional, mental, and financial. And I sought therapy to help me be a better wife because I felt that everything was my fault, that I was the one that was doing things wrong. I could never make him happy. He was always angry and lashing out at me. And I went to see a therapist about that and said, I need to be a better wife. And I explained the reasons why to her, and she started asking me questions. And fortunately, she could sense that something more was happening. And this was years ago when, there was less information out there about abuse. But she told me that it's abuse what you're going through. And I didn't believe her at first. And she said, it is going to escalate to physical if you don't get out of the relationship. And I didn't believe her. So I just, kind of let it go. And I thought I would just take care of things as much on my own as I could. And before I knew it, things started to become physical. And it was when he threw our 5-year-old across a room because he spilled his milk at dinner time. That was when I realized that everything she told me was true and it was right. And then as I started helping women going through, because there isn't that physical aspect to it. So, they will have excuses as to why, if he's drinking or he does drugs or he's tired or he's had a bad day, he's stressed, that they will come up with these reasons why. And they believe that those are the reasons why because that's what their spouse is telling them. And when in fact, it is verbal, mental, emotional, financial, it can be spiritual, it can be,
I think the internet, Donna, unfortunately, is not as strong as we would like that, but we are going to navigate through that. So the last piece, we weren't able to hear that. So you said about the financial as well. There was another piece that you mentioned. Did you want to repeat that?
Yeah, so there's the verbal, emotional, mental, spiritual, financial abuse. Those are different forms of non-physical. And then, of course, there's the physical violence, and then there's the sexual violence, the sexual
Oh,
abuse.
okay.
So,
Yeah.
out of the 7 forms, 5 of them are not physical. And that's the
Yes.
sad part is people don't recognize that because it doesn't reach that bar of being physical, so they don't accept it as abuse that's happening to them. And they don't, that's what I find so heartbreaking because you hear so many cases in the media where women are killed by their abusers and they had no bruises before, they had no injuries before, no reports of it. But people start realizing, well, he was very controlling or she was very controlling, however it works, that, he was very mean to her. He was verbally and mentally and emotionally abusive. And so you hear all that coming out afterwards because all it took was that moment for them to snap, and, and it became physical. And
Yeah, yeah.
unfortunately, it was important people know that, most forms aren't physical.
Do studies have studies proven? Because one of the things that you mentioned, I think you said you went to a psychologist who recognized some of these behavioral patterns, and she was able to kind of warn you. Have studies proven that uh, there can be something done? Because often what we try and do as women, we try and fix the situation.
Yeah.
But so what I'm trying to say, I guess, is are there situations that have shown that with the right intervention and the right support, because let's face it, no matter what you did, Donna, and you proved that you went and got counseling and support to be a better wife, I mean, that kind of thing. It's like, what about being a better husband? And by the way, this is not a men and women bashing thing at all. Let's,
No.
let's, because he obviously there's something that happened to him that and unless they're willing to make the changes, there's only so much that you can do. But have studies proven that there can be some intervention done, like or is the choice just to leave because the situation will only get dire and lead to physical? Has anything been done on that, do you know?
That I couldn't tell you for sure. I do know when I spoke to my therapist at the time, she said that, from her experience and what she's seen and read in regards to those types of abuse, that actually of abuse can be more difficult to treat in someone and to get them help on than the physical forms of abuse. But even at that point, I mean, it is very, very rare because in so many of the cases, they don't either realize that they're an abusive type personality or they, refuse to. A lot of it could be narcissistic tendencies or behavior where they are never wrong. It is always the other person. So it is extremely difficult to treat, and it's unfortunate because I think when it comes down to it, really, until there is something that can prove that we can treat this and some sort of method to treat it, that, you're better off just to get out of the situation. And I will never tell my clients to leave, but I will, educate them as much as I can so that they can make that decision because they also have to make it when it's right for them. Otherwise, it can become extremely dangerous if they just do it on a whim, because someone has told them they need to
Yes.
leave. So it's
Yeah.
it's a difficult situation.
And one of the things that I'm really gathering from you, it's important to have the right support mechanisms in place. For you, you went and saw a therapist who was able to help you. You now, of course, help women who are in that situation as well. Let's talk about some practical steps, some things. If someone is finding themselves and recognizing the environment that I am in, I am scared for my own safety, the safety of my children, yet because the behavior, and I think narcissistic behavior is all about the control and blame, and they may be monitoring every move. And I think that that's what you said too. Because we've spoken previously, your ex-husband was monitoring your movement. He knew exactly where you were. And one of the places where you could get some freedom, if you will, was at work. And of course, for many people now that they don't have the freedom to go to work because they now have to work at the home in the home. What are some practical steps that these women can do?
Well, there's a couple of checklists that I do offer people that free checklists that can help them because, the one thing I do encourage them as long as if they're not in immediate danger, if they're in immediate danger, of course, call 911 or your local authorities. But if you do have some time, the best way to do it is to plan if possible. And by having the items that you need, such as, birth certificates, passports, your driver's license, insurance documents, medical documents. So there's different things that I provide on these checklists of what they should have records of. At that point, when they are ready to leave, that's what their focus on is leaving. It's not distracted by, but I can't leave because I don't have this information, or they try and go back to get that information. And, so I think it's really important that they do prepare as much as they can for their safety and for the kids' safety. And then also there's a safety bag, a checklist that I give them. And that's a bag that they can give to someone that they know, a friend or family member that they trust, that they can give to them. So it has items in there. They've got a place. There's many different, ways to prepare. And that's what I did. I tried to leave and it backfired horrendously. And so I knew that I had to plan, and I was fortunate he would go on the odd guys, day trips out. And I just waited for that to occur. And I planned everything, and then I left. And it was good because I was, clear mind that I had everything else taken care of. I could now just focus on leaving and getting my kids out. And I think that's really important, because when you leave an abusive relationship, that is the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship. And, so it's can be a double-edged sword, because, you're thinking of, the fear of leaving, but also, I remind people, think of the fear of living in that. It's scary, the thought to leave, but it's even scarier, the thought to stay. So,
Yes.
that's something that we really need to look at.
Yeah. And so looking back, I would say that preparation, as you said, is so very important. And you've got some checklists which you are going to share at the end of today, so that people can get a hold of those. It was interesting. The previous guest was saying that there is a sign, and I don't know. She said if you are in trouble, is to hold your hand up, go like this, just to do like that kind of movement. The reason I'm saying that is, in your situation, and I don't know if this is something that you recommend, is it helpful for her to also have some close friends, the ones that she really can trust, that are there, that are aware of that? Or is this something that maybe you I guess the answer is going to be, well, do you have friends? And because, and we're going to talk about, let go of guilt, because there's so many different, I guess, emotions that is going through her head too. But firstly, did you have someone that knew that this was taking place, so that always had your back there, just in case, you're thinking, oh, maybe I should stay? What happened for you? And did you find support was really helpful for you at that stage?
So in my situation, and in a lot of women's situation, we put on this act because our biggest fear is that someone will find out, and that someone will actually approach our abusive spouse and, confront them, because that can really backfire. And I know a lot of people, they say, like they just want to confront them and say, you're doing this to her or him, and, treating them so poorly and all that. And what happens is it's the person that says that, it may make them feel better and they may think it's the right thing to do, but it's the victim that has to stay with that person, and they're going to receive retaliation for that. And the other thing to consider too is that, you don't know what the threat is, because a lot of people just assume that the threat is that the abuser is going to say, I'm going to hurt you, or I'm going to beat you, or whatever it is. But they may be, in fact, threatening their children. They may be threatening their parents, their friends, their other family, their dog, their job. It could be, if they're from a different country, they could be actually threatening to have them turned over to immigration, or to have them sent back to where they're from, or take the children away. And so there's so many different things that are happening than just the abuse at the time. And so, as much as it may feel good to be able to confront them, that does not work at all. So in my situation, and I know in so many people's situation, is I put on this front and I put on this act. No one had the slightest idea that anything was going on. And when I finally broke down, actually, because I was at work and I collapsed and was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. And when they arrived to take me, first thing they're saying is, "Are you under stress or anything?" Oh, no, no, I'm fine. Because I thought, if they call my husband to the hospital, I don't want him, to find out. So I gave them my mom's information. She came down. He found out though, and he came to the hospital and he made quite the scene as he came in and started yelling and screaming at me. So that was the first time anyone knew, was when I told my mom what was happening at that point. And she was just so incredibly supportive. It was unconditional. It was, whatever you need, we're here for you. So her and my dad were there to offer whatever support. They were, I think they felt a lot of guilt because they felt that they should have seen something. But I reassured them that no, that was my goal, is for you not to see anything, because I also didn't want him, affecting you in any way. And so there's so many things that are going on that, you just don't want anyone to know. And a lot of it is shame too. There's a lot of shame involved in it, which there shouldn't be. I mean, we've done nothing wrong. And that's the sad part, is that there is so much shame, and there's so much judgment attached to it, where, people would say to me afterwards, "Well, you should have seen it coming. You should have, left as soon as it happened. Uh, you know, it's your fault because you didn't see it, you didn't report it," all these things. And, it's a very, very gradual process. And until you've been in it, you can never really truly understand
Yeah.
that you go into a relationship and they gain your trust and you
Yes.
trust them. And then that's when it starts to flip.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a
One
lot.
of the other things that I have also read as well about narcissists is that externally to everyone else, the nicest of people. And if you were to say something to them that's like, no. So be mindful of those people. It is an act. It is an act. It's and they're really good at it. And I think that in itself too, because in instances where there's a relationship, all of a sudden after you're married, the cracks start coming through, or something has happened that's causing more stress, and then the cracks get even bigger. But and you said something earlier that I want to draw upon too, and this is the whole fact that you were saying it can sometimes be the slow process that you don't even realize that you are actually starting to question, well, maybe it is me. You made me do it. No one makes you do anything. We all need to take ownership of our behavior, even in the most stressful of situations, how you react, how you speak to someone. And I think words can do just as much damage, can't they? Psychological
Yes.
words, financial abuse. And I'm sure financial abuse is when they have such control over your money, you can't do anything with it. You have to ask them certain things. And I'd imagine, I mean, you mentioned some of the others. Do you just want to give a definition of what that could look like so someone can kind of see? And another question, so give it a little bit of a definition, and then if there's one thing happening, they might find that there are other things that are happening too around so if you've got the verbal abuse, you might also have a bit of financial abuse going on there as well. Is that something that can often happen as well?
So, what I'm seeing is a lot of or not divorce, sorry, abuse situations, is that when there's some form of abuse, there's often a secondary form of abuse. And financial abuse is very common because it's a form of control. So they may force you to work very hard and you don't see any of your money, or they may not allow you to work. so you can't make any money. But the whole intention is to isolate you and move you away from any opportunities to freedom. So whether it's through money, whether it's through friends, so they will, it's very common for them to isolate you in any form of abuse. So if, in my instance, I have had a best friend that I've had my entire life, and it got to the point where he liked her at the beginning. But then he started telling me that, I don't think that it's good that you hang around with them, or you're not spending enough time with the family. You should be spending time with our friends, not your friend. And he just slowly pulled me away to the point where I didn't have the opportunity really to do anything. He kept me busy and he monitored me. And it just, that's common, is they just pull you away from any type of support system. And for me, one of the points of, when I really realized that I did need to get away after he threw our son is when he started telling me I couldn't see my brother. And my brother and I were extremely close, and he didn't want me seeing him anymore. And he also was starting to tell me he didn't want me to see my parents anymore. So there was a lot of, and it's very subtle. And that's the thing that people don't realize. It's like the frog in the boiling water. I dated my husband for, it was 2 years before, we got engaged, and another year till our wedding. And there was nothing really there that would have given me any indication. And his family is amazing. And so there was nothing there that, made me think, oh, something's off. And so that's the thing, is it can happen so gradually. And he got my trust, and we got married. And it was after we got married that he slowly started to, say, well, I'll do the finances, because I've been living on my own for years. And I had come from my parents' home to, the wedding home. And it made sense to me. So I said, okay. He said, we'll open up a joint account. Great. And then I was told I wasn't allowed to touch the joint account. And then I was threatened if I would have touched the joint account. And so there was so many little things that go on. And, like you were saying about the, feeling like you're kind of crazy because everyone else loves them. And that's the other problem, is why you don't trust yourself. A lot of gaslighting that can occur, because they will cause you to doubt yourself, second guess everything, and they can be extremely charming. I really there's not a lot of them that I've seen that are not charming to other people. And that's again what makes it so unbelievable for some people to understand, is because everybody loves them, which makes the victim feel even worse, because they're thinking, well, then it must be me. So there's a lot that goes on.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Well, let's share, Donna, if you would, the how can they get that resource? What's the best place for them to go and get that from you? I'm assuming your website.
Yeah, so they can go to my website. It's donna-james.com, and they can go to my coaching section in there, or they can email me at info@donna-james.com, and I can just email it to them. So I don't keep that online just for security reasons. We don't want abusers going on there and going, okay, well, this is what I should look for. So, if they just send me an email, I can send that off to them. That's not a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So amazing. And I know that you also share a little bit more about the work that you do, because I'd imagine that once you did leave, there was a lot of rebuilding, a lot of healing for you, a lot of that process of letting go. But you have rebuilt your life, and you've got, as we mentioned earlier on, you have a beautiful, loving husband. And I think you mentioned to me, and when we had a conversation beforehand, that you would often say to your now new husband, "Is it all right if I go out?" or something like that. And he said, "Why are you asking me that for?" So it's almost like you have to unlearn certain behavior, but that's
Yeah.
also what you support people with. But why I'm sharing that is that there is hope, there is possibility. You are living that now. So share a little bit more about some of the support that you can also offer women.
So when I was going through, after I left my husband and I was going to see a therapist, and she admittedly said to me, though, I've never been in that situation. So I can provide you with textbook information, but none of it was anything I could really use. And that was when I said to my parents that when I get through this, and I will, I'm going to help other women, because there was this gap there of, you've got professional therapists, then it's, where do I go? And unless there's somebody that's been through that and experienced it, it's very hard to describe and understand. And there's a lot of judgment, that may come across very innocently, but, when you're going through that, you're very sensitive to that. So, I rebuilt myself. I used a lot of different tools to help me through. And I can tell you, journaling is amazing. And it's also a great way to document everything and to go through that. And so once I started healing, and people started to see my transformation, they started asking me to help them with their situation. And then I had people that, I'd be in my full-time job. I'm so sorry.
That's all
I'd be
right.
in my
The
full-time job,
joys of live stream. You've got little creatures at home.
and and he's not being beaten, by the way. I'm not sure
He's
what's
just
going on.
excited.
But I think it's the neighbors. But so what would happen is I would be working my full-time job, and I go see a client and about something completely different, and they'd start crying, and they would open up to me, and they'd say, I just feel I can talk to you. And so that's when I started realizing I can make a difference to people by helping them in this regard. Before I was thinking, well, I can, volunteer to shelter or something, but this really resonated with me, that I could be that point between, realizing or just wondering what's wrong with my relationship, to I need to get out, or I want to get out, or I need to heal after I get out, to be that person that understands what it's like, who's been there, done that, and can, really help somebody and make a difference. And so I started coaching women, and I then became a certified coach, just so I could get some additional training in that. And I've just been helping women. This is my passion. I love doing it. And I've been doing it since 2006. And I've had women I've sat in a hair salon with for several hours, and they've gone home and left their abusers after their family had tried everything. So, I think being able to talk to someone who's been through it, and,
Yes.
and to see that they got through it, is a really big motivator and inspiring for someone who's in the situation. And that's why I felt, I went through this and I got through it, and I owe it to other women to help them through this. And so that's what I'm there for, is to help inspire, empower, educate, and just help them in any way I can.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I said when we spoke in our initial catch-up call, I said, "Oh, Donna, you have to come on and share your story," because you're absolutely right. And, there can be people that unknowingly are trying to be helpful but are anything but. And we know that we filter things, don't we, through our own understanding, in some instances misunderstanding, or there may be things that we think this is the way that it really needs to be. We're not living in their shoes, and they are not responsible for trying to change their abuser. They are not responsible for them, but what they are responsible for, and let's empower them to realize this is not okay. The environment you're living in is not okay. You don't have to continue living that way, and especially if you've got young children. You know, I know as a mother, which is, as you said, was one of the key turning points for you when you saw the abuser was starting then to turn the attention onto your children, so that this has to stop, and there's certainly a way through. And so thank you for sharing your message. Reach out to Donna. Her web address, of course, again, is donna-james.com, and certainly can have a conversation with you, Donna. So thank you so much once again for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad anything I can do to get the message out there to help women and men.
Thanks.
Thanks.
This podcast is brought to you by theinfluencealliance.com. Want to influence real change with your message by becoming known as a trusted authority in your industry while building a sustainable and scalable business you love? Find out how by accessing our free podcast series at www.theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series. That's theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series.